Hi everyone and welcome to Funtastic Potplants. Yay! You know I can't get enough of plants, whether in my home or in painting both. And this series was inspired by the pot plants that's in our bedroom. I would spend some time in the comfortable chair we have there with some paint on my lap and just paint what I see, and it inspired a series of 3 pot plants that I've taught in in-person workshops, and now I'm bringing this to you online because I know we all need to fit things into a busy lifestyle, and online is often the easiest way to do that. So today I'm going to guide you through one specific pot plant, and then in this video, in the resources, I will include 3 templates for you for the 3 different pot plants that I had painted. This is a Draconia palm, this is a fiddle leaf fig, and this one I'll have to get back to you on the name. But all 3 plants in our home that I painted from real life and then simplified down into these trace templates and line drawings that I will explain in just a second how you can make this work at home. But these line drawings that then really simplifies things out for you so that you can really just get down to the business of painting. Let's talk about the line drawings quickly. I know when we look at a painting and when we look at a plant, it can be very overwhelming as to where to start. There's so much detail and so much information going on, and especially if you're just starting out with watercolors, maybe this is your first time picking up a brush or you're coming out of a bit of a creative block, we don't want to overcomplicate things too much. And that's where these line drawings come in really handy. Now, if you have tracing paper at home, the 90 GSM version prints really well on a home printer. You can just print off the template that I've included for you at home. You'll see different sizes. This is the A5. And otherwise you can actually really just print this on plain printer paper, and when you follow the tracing process you do the same thing, but you hold it up to the light when you need to see the lines to trace onto your watercolor paper. Lastly, if you feel like you just want to dive in and practice your drawing skills, this is also then just a great reference for you to put aside to look at that version but to draw it freehand on your paper. So you have 3 options of how you put your pencil drawing down onto your paper. I do this purely to get past that fear of the blank page, the fear of not knowing where to start, like which leaves do I draw, which don't I draw, and this just helps you to get past that little block and just really get into painting. Okay, so just again, those files are included for you in the resources with this video. You can download them and then either use them as a reference on a screen to just draw from, or print them out as per what I just explained. Okay, so today I'm feeling like the Draconia palm. It's quite a small mini palm, but I really love it. It's very quirky and fun. So this is my tracing template, and I'm going to show you through that just now. I'll be using 300 GSM student grade watercolor paper. I love the Canson XL paper for this. It's cellulose paper, but really good quality and very affordable, and it really holds up a lot of water. This is just a couple of quick examples of other versions that I've done. Some really quick and loose and light, different colors. And it's just to give you the idea that you can start with the same template, but really end up with very varied paintings and colors. And that's what I'm going to show you today. Okay. Before we get into taping this down, let's quickly talk about colors. I have selected 5 colors that I'll be using today, but I will guide you through what you can use based on what you have at home. Okay, so I know at my local store the stock varies. Some days I get this color, another day it's out of stock. So this really isn't rigid based on specific colors. Basically, and I'm going to squeeze them out as we go, you can either use a side plate like this. It already has some previous paint on that's already dried. It's just wet because I cleaned it just now for you guys. You can use a plate like that. You can use a plastic palette if this is what you have on hand, or you could even take your paper and make yourself a little inspiration dot card. I literally just took my watercolor paper, cut it into this kind of bookmark shape, and then just squeeze out the dots and let it dry overnight. This is a nice way if you want to kind of play like a random inspiration with your watercolor, so you can have a few dot cards lying around. You don't need so many plates, and then you just pick up a color palette. Maybe just write down the colors on the dot card for yourself so you don't forget what they are. I like using one of each of the primaries at least, but I tend towards using a warm yellow. You can also use a cool yellow like lemon yellow. I just feel the warm yellow is a bit easier to work with. So for today, I have got cadmium yellow. This one is Winsor & Newton Cotman brand. Another brand that I really like that's an affordable student grade paint is the Daler Rowney Aquafine. But really, you know, any mid-grade student range paint will be great for this tutorial. The second color I pick is a blue. Now, cerulean blue is a really nice one, but mine is out of stock, so I'm using Prussian blue, which is a bright, vibrant blue. You'll see it's quite dark, but it lightens down to a very beautiful sky color, and it mixes up really beautiful colors as well. So I'll be guiding you through that. So any blue that you're comfortable with, cerulean blue, Prussian blue, ultramarine, whatever you feel like playing with today. For our pink or our red, I'm playing with something a little bit off from the normal. I'm using mauve, which is a purpley pink color. It was just something that I had lying around and that I wanted to play around with the color mixes, but you can use any cool red or cool pink, such as permanent rose, rose madder pink, even alizarin crimson will do the trick. Cadmium red will work, but it's not quite as versatile as your cool pink or your cool red, so that would be our first choice. Then we've got a sap green, which is just a convenience green. I'm going to show you how to mix it up a bit, that it doesn't, you know, just come straight from the tube and look too artificial. And then lastly, I like including a convenience neutral like sepia, or otherwise Payne's Grey, or one of those, even indigo. The sepia for the palm is quite nice because the stem of the palm is a dark green and brown color. So the sepia is also a really nice way to mix up some vintage colors, and I'll be guiding you through that color mixing process throughout the course of this video. Other supplies that you will need is I'm using a golden Taklon synthetic round brush. This is really quite a cheap, affordable brush, and it does the trick. And you only need a size 8 round. I'm going to show you how versatile this brush is. A spray bottle to wet your paint and to wet your paper. 2 containers of water, one to clean your brush in and one to pick up new water. Some masking tape and a surface to tape your paper down on. This just helps keep the paper flat while we can still move the board around. Some paper towel and a pencil for our tracing or line drawing. And then last, as a bonus, if you feel you like bringing in a bit of white into your painting at the very end, you can either have some gouache, or this white jelly roll pen is one of my favorites. It's any gel white pen is a really nice way to bring in some last white details. And if you need it, an eraser. This is just a putty kneaded eraser. Okay, so that's our supplies sorted. Next up, we are going to dive right into getting our pencil sketch onto our paper. Okay, so I'm going to show you the tracing method with a piece of tracing paper. But as I said, this will work even if you print out the line drawing onto a normal white ATGSM printer or bond paper. You're going to follow the same process. If you need to see the lines better, you can then just hold your drawing up to the window. So for this part, if you're doing that, just make sure not to tape down your watercolor paper to the board. We're just going to tape down our tracing paper at the top here once we're ready to trace. Okay, so this is, you might have done it in school, just the old school way of scratching out some pencil marks at the back, and then we're going to turn this paper around, and once we trace over the lines at the front, it actually transfers the graphite from your pencil onto your watercolor paper, and there you have it. Any line drawing that you've practiced or that you're comfortable with, you can practice it on printer paper and then use this method to transfer your drawing onto your watercolor paper. So I'm just going to start. I'm using my pencil flat like this, and you want to make sure that it's nice and sharp. And I'm just, with light pressure, scrubbing or rubbing across the paper, making sure to cover the different areas of the template. Now again, if you're using your printer paper, you might just need to hold it up to the light occasionally to see whether you've covered all the lines, but it usually does show through quite clearly just on the board as well. So you don't need to cover the whole area, just there where the lines run. And it doesn't have to be pitch black dark. This should be sufficient. Now remember, the direction in which you've scratched out or rubbed in your graphite, it's going to be the reverse that we trace onto. So now that we've done that, I'm just aligning my paper with my painting. So in this case, I'm using A5. I'm not aligning it at the top because my paper is slightly smaller, the paper at the back. Just making sure it's right, lined up nicely, and using a bit of masking tape. I'm just going to stick it, it's actually a too big piece, but anyway, just going to stick it over, making sure that I don't cover the drawing part. Okay, so this allows us to keep the tracing paper in place, because trust me, the moment you start tracing and the tracing paper moves, it is impossible to get back to that same point. So it keeps it in place, and it also allows us to lift it while keeping it in place, and then just check, do we have everything done before we take it off. Okay, so really just one piece of masking tape is fine. And if your pencil is would have sharpened itself in this process, so make sure it's still a sharp point. And then we're just, again with firm pressure, just going to trace over those lines on our paper. And if you're working with your printer paper at this point, if you've traced on the back of the printout, if you've scratched your graphite onto the back, this should be easy because you're just tracing over the front printed lines, and you'll be able to see there where you have traced is kind of a mark onto the printed area. But otherwise you can just use our flip method to see. Let me quickly show you. There you can see it started to transfer, and this is a perfect level of line for what we're going to do with painting. Okay, so you can check as you go along. If you need to, just continue to trace. Don't worry about imperfect lines or not following the sketch perfectly. Remember, in the final drawing, no one's going to hold your drawing up to my line drawing. This is just a guideline. It's a template for you guys to just help you get past that first drawing step if you need to. You can apply this tutorial to any pot plant that inspires you, whether you want to just paint it from life using the color mixes and techniques, or whether you want to create your own little line drawing and then follow the same process and create your own beautiful variation of pot plants. Okay, so there we go. I'm just tracing along these lines. I'm going to speed this up for you guys so that you can just do it in your own time. Okay, and there we have it. So you can do a quick check, just make sure that everything that you need is there. Some lines might be lighter than others, that's fine, as long as you can see enough of what's going on the paper. You can take off your template. Just going to take off this extra piece, and you can set this aside on hand. If you need to refer to the line drawing, you can just keep it nearby. Alright, so now that we have our pencil drawing in place, we're going to get right into painting our background. So I know we're touching on a couple of subjects that could feel very intimidating. The one is the background of our painting. We can so often feel that we're going to ruin our painting by doing the wrong background, not doing it properly, or going over the wrong places. So we're going to look at how we get past that fear. And the second one, which really blends into how do I pick colors for my background and pick colors for my final painting, is all about color mixing. All right, now I like to really just jump right in, and especially with this kind of project, because we're working on a small area and because we can easily repeat this process, especially now that you've created your trace template, you can just go right over it again. You know, it's actually quite easy to just create a couple of variations and play around for yourself to see what you like and what colors you like to play with, what worked, what didn't. Okay, but just to kind of help for that in-between step, I always like to have a bit of scrap paper on hand, or even just plain printed paper, just to test my color mixes and just to see, do I like what's happening, especially if I can't tell on the plate or on the mixing area, or I feel I just want to double check. It is good to just either have some printed paper or an extra sheet of your watercolor paper on hand. So if you need to, you can just grab that quickly and then come right back to the video. Okay. As I talk about the color mixing, I'm just going to be taping down my painting here. And one of the reasons that I like using the palette like this and even the dot cards is I like to challenge myself from time to time to try out colors that I'm not comfortable with and to just experiment with them. And one of my favorite ways of doing that is by mixing it wet into wet. Okay, and that is where a background is going to be perfect. So all I've done is I've taken my masking tape and I've just taped it along the edges. I don't worry about measuring. I just put it as straight as I can. If it's not perfect, that's fine. And I just run my hand along it gently so that it doesn't lift up and pull color underneath. Okay, and then I'm just actually tilting my board and putting my masking tape underneath it just so that we have a bit of movement of the water on our paper. Okay, so something that you could use to help you pick out colors is one of these color wheels. If you Google color wheels or color schemes, you will find some really nice resources. I'll include a link for you below of one that I like to use. That's like a little color scheme generator. But one of the core principles is that I like to use, if I use a cool color in the background, I keep my warmer colors for the foreground, or vice versa. Do warm colors in the background and do cool colors for our plants. Okay, so it could be still a green if you want to, or you can make your plant, let me grab one of these examples for you, completely different colors. So this one is a bit more real life inspired. This one was quite funky and psychedelic, doing different colors. And then this one just very, very loose and quick, just as a quick demonstration. So maybe just start with what you feel like, or follow along with what I'm going to be doing here today. Another fun thing that I like to do is to do a complementary color scheme, which is where the colors are right opposite each other. Okay, so you could see, for example, the plant is green, red is right opposite it, so you can kind of play around with having those two colors different in different proportions in your painting. So let's maybe go with that. I know green and red can feel like a very garish color scheme, but let's see if we can make it work on our painting. Okay, and that's just going to be our kind of guideline again, but we might change things along as we paint. So I always like to bring you along for the journey. You might see me trying out all kinds of different things and maybe adjusting as we go. So step one that's very, very helpful for the background, even before we start mixing up our colors, is to just, between your spray bottle and your brush, wet the area around your plant outline with clean water. Now don't worry if it goes over the outline. You can fix that with a bit of the paper towel by drying that piece of paper, or it just really actually creates a nice blend with the colors into that area. So I've sprayed my water onto my paper. It's just a nice quick way to get more water onto the paper. Now I'm just using my brush to fill in those areas. Now if you tilt your paper, you'll be able to see some areas are shiny and some areas are not. So that's where your water is. So you can see on the plant, it's quite dry there. Okay. So we're just continuing to fill in those areas, paying attention to what our water looks like on our paper. Even though there's no color on it, you kind of just, it's like making new friends, right? You kind of pay attention to what they like, what they don't like. The longer this water sits on the paper, the less shiny it gets. It goes from being shining wet to becoming damp. The paper will buckle a little bit, don't worry about that. And if you're in there, you don't have perfect coverage of your paper, don't worry about that either. Like here, there's a little mark, and I like to kind of leave those little dry spots that happen unexpectedly. If you feel your papers dry too quickly, you can just come in with a little bit more water, especially from the top, because remember, gravity is pulling our water down. And if at any point with your background you see that it's too dry, the paint isn't flowing enough, use your trusty spray bottle. Okay, and just remember to have some paper towel on hand as well. So now, because we're going to kind of aim for that red and green color scheme, the closest thing I have to red at this point is the pink mauve color. I'm just going to mix up, using the side of my brush, a bit of that pink, and I'm bringing in a little bit of yellow to turn it more towards an orangey red. Okay, so this won't be a perfect red because of the colors that I've picked, but it is actually quite a nice muted pink red color. And I'm just going to start, I like starting at the edges of my background because then it creates a light spot in the middle of my painting. And I'm just picking up various levels of paint from my plate. You can also mix up your puddles of paint beforehand. In my case, a bit of the blue is running in there. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to show you how I'm going to run with that. Little happy accident, just using some of my spray bottle quickly. And pay attention to how the colors run together and just what they do on the page. Okay, so I'm going to bring in a bit of that blue, mix in a bit of purple. Let's see, make it a bit darker. To just kind of darken those edges, because what I'm aiming for here is to have my darker colors at the back and then bring in lighter variations into the foreground. Now, using a light touch, you can come in and just kind of fill in those areas around the plant leaves. And if you need to, you can just use the piece of printer paper or scrap paper to even just practice those strokes and just get comfortable with your brush. So you will see, because we've now mixed all three of the primary colors together, we're jumping right in, it might start to feel a little bit muddy. But remember, muddy is really just a different term for a good neutral or a muted color as well, which is perfect for the background because we don't want that to be too bright. We still want our pot plant to be our main event, right? So I'm just playing around with some colors. I'm going to bring in a bit of splatter, which is one of my favorite ways to just bring in texture and variation in my background. And really, I'm just giving these colors the space to mingle and to just do their own thing on the paper. Especially because we want to focus on the red side, bringing in a bit of that mauve. And you'll notice as well, where the paper is wet, the splatter disperses a bit, it fades into the paper. And then where the paper's already started to dry, you'll see that the splatter stays a bit more with straight edges, or like crisp round edges. Okay, and I think I'm actually quite happy with that as a background. Maybe put some clean water here. You can even splatter some clean water onto your page, which creates a very beautiful, almost like sun sparkle effect. right over there. And just see how beautiful these colors are that are mixing together. So for areas that you feel like you want to change the shape a bit, you can bring in some more water. And everywhere that you've placed water, the watercolor flows, right? And there where it stayed dry, the paper stays crisp and dry. And this is exactly how you can control your watercolor. Okay, so I'm going to come in with a hairdryer and just on a gentle setting dry this off, and then we can get into step 2, which will be painting our foreground plant. I just like to take a moment at this part of the process and just kind of pause and see what I like about what's happened on the paper. I'm just kind of putting plans and expectations aside and just pausing for a moment. And what catches my eye is this gorgeous pinky pastel color here, this splatter and texture, and just this combination of colors that's happening on the paper. So I'm actually quite happy with that. When I started out with red and green, I wasn't sure where this was going to go, but I quite like what's happened on the paper. And even if you don't like what's happened, try and find at least one color or texture or spot that you like, that you would like to continue into the next layer or a second painting. But even if you feel like the background hasn't quite worked out, let's just push through and use this then as an experiment, because if you already don't like it, you can just go all the way in and just see what else you can learn from this piece of paper, right? Okay, but let's all agree and just assume for now that we're happy with our backgrounds. I'm very happy with mine. It's all about our mindset. And I'm going to start with a couple of options for mixing greens. When we have greens, we really want to have everything from a lighter green to a dark shadowy green and the mid-tone in between. This is what's going to give our plant a lot of life and a lot of depth, even though we don't need to do a lot of detail to get that effect. So first off, I'm going to see what happens when I mix my yellow with a little bit of sap green. And for this, I just quickly want to show you guys then on my scrap paper what's happening. Now, if you want your colors to not kind of combine like this, you might be better off with a palette that has some separate areas in it. But I'm okay if the colors mingle and mute a little bit as well. Okay, so this is one of the first ways that you can very easily, even if it's super cheap paint, if you add a bit of yellow or a bit of sepia to your green, that could be very, very like bright, cheap, artificial green, it already creates like a beautiful olivey tone. Okay, adding a bit of water just to see there what happens. So that would be our lightest tone. I'm going to see what happens when I mix my yellow and my Prussian blue, which can create like a really beautiful emerald, almost an undersea green. It will be quite a good mid-tone for us, and obviously depending on how much I add of the mixture, that would vary. And then I can either use Prussian blue with sap green and see what that looks like as a dark version. Like such, which is quite beautiful already. I've added in quite a bit of blue here, more than the sap green. Or you can also experiment with what happens when you add sepia. Okay, and the sepia is going to be great for some last details as well. So I have 2 to 4 shades of green that you just know what your game plan is going to be. This is a really beautiful dark, like a grey-green shadowy color. I hope the colors are showing up nicely for you on the camera. So I'm just going to start, and this time I'm going to work wet into dry. Our background, we wetted the paper first with clean water. That could be either with clean water or with another layer of paint. We worked wet into wet. Now our paper is completely dry because we want those crisp edges of our pot plant. Okay, and I'm just kind of balancing my board here. It's still on my piece of masking tape just to give it some elevation. And you can mix up a nice bit of paint for yourself just to have some available before we start working, because the moment we start putting color on the paper, we will be having wet on dry, but then a wet area in the paper that we can again use this beautiful blending option to bring in some of those deeper shadow colors. Okay, and then as a very last layer, once we've dried that off, we will just bring in some of our sharp fine detail marks. So I'm mixing up my lighter color, which is more of a yellowy green. So for this pot plant, I'm going for more the traditional green pot plant, but you can also do the same process with, you know, say a light pink towards a purple, and then like a deep brown purple color for your details. So you can just kind of pick your own 3 colors. It doesn't have to be realistic. Now you'll see that our pencil marks have faded a little bit underneath our watercolor. So if you need to, you can just kind of refer and see, okay, that's where that leaf goes, and that's the point of the leaf. But you can also just play around and just have your hand, you know, create its own thing. So I'm coming in with a light touch, moving my brush along that leaf, keeping a light touch on it, filling in those little leaves that were growing out there, and just kind of moving the color with broad strokes of my brush. I'm kind of keeping my brush flat against the paper. So I'm pulling it out, and rather than trying to work with the tip of my brush the whole time, I'm trying to see how much I can do with one big stroke rather than a bunch of little strokes. And if you don't cover the leaf exactly, that's perfectly fine. It's kind of the aim of the game to create that little bit of a loose feel to your pot plant. And you can come in and just with a light touch then create those tips of the plants. Okay, so working quickly, I'm bringing in that mid-tone and just towards the front edge of the leaf, bringing in a bit of deeper color. And just adding that in. And the palm tree has some green in its stem, so I'm going to start that off with a bit of green and just fill it in. Cleaning off my brush and just using some clean water to kind of pull out that color, and then bring in a bit of sepia into the stem. Follow those light little zigzag lines, and you'll see it will flow quite a bit at this point, and that's actually exactly what I want. I do want to create that bit of texture. And here and there towards the stem of the tree, we're going to create that very deep, dark, brownish blue color that I'd shown you earlier. I'm going for something quite dark. It always dries a little bit later than it you see on your paper as well. And I'm just dropping it lightly with the tip of my brush, pulling out some of the color, working from the stem, because that is where the plant would be the darkest. I'm putting in some of that color towards the trunk of the little tree as well, and just letting myself play around a little bit with some of those details. I like to kind of emphasize the tips of the tree, and then I'm also going to come in just now with an even darker color and just fill in those little lines, that bit of texture that's in there. But before I do that, I like to splatter a bit. It helps me to loosen up. It helps me to keep that color in different parts of the painting, so it creates a nice harmony. And don't stress too much if you feel like there's too much contrast or too much going on here. The paint will still dry a little bit lighter than what you see right now, but it just creates some nice movement and contrast as well. And for this, I didn't have to work while the entire leaf stayed wet. I like this variation of contrast where, say here in the middle, my painting is still wet, so that paint is moving and creating its own thing. And then on the leaves there, I can come in with some dark detail. Okay, so while I'm in the flow of things, mixing up an even darker version using sepia and Prussian blue, you'll see your blue might overshadow the color that you're mixing, so just pay attention and add more of the other color if you need to. And I haven't even used my hairdryer. I'm just paying attention to the natural state of dryness on my paper and just using a very light touch on my brush, kind of letting it balance between my fingers, letting its tip just lightly touch the paper, just to bring in that little last bit of detail. And again, you can kind of work in that pencil sketch that I've given you, or just let your eye follow along and just play a little bit. Remember, the darker that we put details and the sharper details we put in is where we'll be guiding the viewer's eyes. You kind of just want to dance around the page a little bit and just make sure that there's little bits of it along the way. Bringing in that diagonal stroke that we see here, this little diagonal. And now I'm going to rinse off my brush, pick up some clean water, and in a smaller scale apply what we used for our background on the pot, because I really like creating that effect of a white pot. So you want to just wet the whole pot. In my case, I've pulled in some of that green that was still wet at the bottom. That's perfectly fine. And I'm just going to be really bold and come in with this dark color as a shadow color. And for myself, I'm quickly pretending the light is, say, coming from this side, so it would pull a shadow towards here. So I'm putting in on that wet piece of paper just a bit of color to where the shadow would be, varying between broad flat strokes of my brush and some lighter touches. And again, just cleaning my brush, bringing in some clear water and drawing that color down to the foreground and picking up a bit of, let's make it mauve with sepia, kind of like a muted purpley pink for the foreground. Okay, and I can drop in some of that color into my shadow as well, just kind of going with the flow and the feel of the moment. And on the other side, where there would be less shadow, I'm just, with a light touch of my brush, creating a bit of an outline of that shape. And because this is a new color mix that I haven't used, I like to just splatter it in different places. I like to bring it in for just some last detail. And what's actually happening now, because this is a reddish mix, it's a muted red, but it is a red, I can use it to create nice color interest and contrast on the plant. Just touches here and there. One last thing that I want to do is to just bring in a last dark bit of color. Remember, every time you put water down on the paper first, it will dry out lighter, because water makes your watercolors light. That's how we tone down or lighten up our watercolor. So I'm using my blue and my brown to mix kind of a almost neutral gray, and just putting it along that bottom edge of the pot and drawing out a shadow, filling in a bit of that soil that would be in the pot, and just bringing in some last minor details. Now I'm actually feeling that I'm at the point of overworking this, so I'm going to stop right there. So I actually feel like I'm at the point of overworking the details, so I'm actually going to stop right there. I can put a little bit of this dark splatter in different places just to bring in the color harmony again. And then what I like to do is to kind of pick my favorite, or the main color that we focused on, which I feel was the red for me. I wanted to play with the mauve. I'm just going to pick up some of that color and splatter it over the end. And if you feel like there's too much splatter, you can fade it out with some clean water. So I can do this over that background, or you can dab it up with your paper towel. So if there's too much splatter, you can fade it out with some clean water on your brush, or you can dab it up with your paper towel and just lighten it a bit. But there you have it. I want to bring in a little bit of the yellow just for some last splatter, just because I feel like having a bit of that sunshine. Bring that into the foreground, which will mix with that grey. And I'm going to stop. You can see me wanting to touch more and do more, but actually watercolor is quite sneaky like that, that we don't need to do as much as we think. Okay, so this would be perfectly fine finished just as is. We've got our nice pot. That last bit of yellow I actually quite like there. It's created that sunshine effect, the light coming onto this white pot and casting a nice shadow, and then the details on our leaves. As a last bonus, if you want to add in a little bit of white detail, I'm going to show you that just now. Let's just make sure to dry off our painting, otherwise it's not going to have the effect that we want. Okay, so as I said, you can leave this as is. We've tried to keep some white space. You'll see in some spaces I didn't fill in the leaf completely, which creates a nice little bit of white space highlight there. But if you just want to bring in a last little bit of detail, we're going to grab our white pen. Just shifting aside my papers. So we're going to grab this white pen. You can also use some thick opaque white gouache. And just here and there where you kind of see your darkest values, you're just going to run a line along those edges. You can bring in little dots for like a bit of sparkle. I like to emphasize the corners and the tips of my leaves. And it just brings in the last level of fun and detail. So I'm doing that along the stem here. And you really, again, just want to make sure not to overdo it. We're just bringing in that last little bit of light definition along our dark edges. So here I'm just defining that pot a little bit. And that's it, as quick as that. Just a few dots and sparkles and splatters, and you're ready to take off your masking tape. So make sure to grab it at an angle. So making sure to pull it down at an angle, pull it lightly. If it really feels like it's getting stuck to the paper and it's going to tear, use your hair dryer just to warm the glue a bit. And there we have it. A really fun, quick pot plant that you can repeat now with different colors and different color combinations. So before you call it done, just make sure, if you want to, you can use a pen, or you can challenge yourself and go in with your brush. If you want to use a finer brush at this point, you're welcome. Pick up some of your color, and with a lot of flair and flourish, regardless of how you feel about your painting, make sure to sign your name. This is your creation after all. You spent the time painting it, and to add to your creative process. So there we have it. A quick recap of what you've learned while playing with this beautiful pot plant. We have experimented with color mixes. Now you'll see we definitely didn't hit the red, but knowing that we didn't start with the red, we weren't really expecting that. Instead, we got this really beautiful muted pink, which is a variation of red, and then our purples. But we've experimented a little bit, and I think it came out well. I like how the green pops off the page and how we have our color variations. So we were inspired by a complementary color scheme. Then we used wet in wet to create our background, which creates soft textured colors. I like to do that first, because then if it goes a little bit differently than I expected, I can just come in and play with the plant in the foreground to kind of resolve that, rather than doing the plant first and then worrying about the background. We used some splatter for texture. We dried it off with our hairdryer, and then we used variations of green from our lightest shade to mid-tone to a beautiful green, gray, blue color mixed with the sepia and the Prussian blue to create this different levels of details. And we brought in a deep muted red to create some last contrast and details. And our wet and wet on the pot. So there you have it. I hope you had fun. I hope you're eager to paint some more and to create another pot plant. I've included all 3 templates for you, so you can go ahead and either apply the same color scheme to different templates, or apply a different color scheme to each one and create your own beautiful set of pot plants that you can hang at your wall, on your wall at the end of all your beautiful creative endeavors. I would love to see how you go, so come and tag me on Instagram or wherever you prefer. I've got the details for you on this video, so yeah, I would love to see what you create. Until next time, cheers.